Okay, just a reminder, the exam is when on it? Next Thursday, 1 week from today. So you got a week to study. All right. And what time did I say we'd start the exam? 8:30. Hopefully everybody listen will also hear that. All right, and I'm going to give you a copy of the old test, test 3. I didn't get back to it. It may or may not have your name on it. Just as long as you get a copy, that's all that matters. Yeah. All right, enjoy it later. This test is not good. Some of these are marked in, they make you buy the room. I said, as long as you get a test. Now, why am I giving you that test? Study from it. Take it home, do what you want to with it. It's got ratios on it, cash flow, and we'll give you another short test, just multiple choice, as a makeup test. Now, if you don't have to take it, if you don't want to, you take the grade I've got that you have to see. Okay? But I would take this when I'll give you the better 2 grades. I haven't shown it to anybody.
Oh, you're able to see it when you make it behind.
On the last test, I hate for you to see them.
I'd rather see it.
You see where I'm putting the skin from. Sydney, you may be actually great, Sean.
These are saying about you. These are your tool. Yeah, sure.
I should multiply that red number by 2 and see what your grades are. And then do some of this.
Okay. Do we all, y'all, 60 days?
Oh, yeah. Extra credit.
No, I'm saying, yeah, all we did, we did. That's fine, that's fine.
I'm just moving later.
All right, the highest grade that I can found just now, I think is, multiply that by 2. And that's the highest grade. Okay, but, see why I didn't get it back to you, and go over. And here's the test, you can take it home, do whatever you want to with it. Same day, maybe 33 questions on the same 3 chapters, 15, 16, 17. Okay, and hopefully you can improve this grade. I'm not going to record it until you take the next test. You're not going to get here at 8:30 and the exam is supposed to end at 10, but you can have the 12 if you want to. Okay? Nobody will be rushed. So, exam next Thursday, 8:30. All right, I'm not gonna go over this test, so,
Look it up. That's what it
okay, so that's test 3 out of the way. Everybody has a test to study from. Exam next Thursday, 8:30, you got a week. Now, your exam is on chapter 18 and 19. That'll be a separate test when you hand in test 3. And 18 and 19, we've got a lot to wrap up on those, so let me grab my book.
That's perfect practice. Me too.
Oh, look, this one outside. I guess you all saw in the email from the president with the boys tennis team, I guess they won regional. And I've got a couple students in cost and taxes. I don't know where the national will be, Colorado or somewhere. So they've got to leave like tomorrow evening. They got to take all their exams today and tomorrow. What have you, so. All right, managerial accounting. We started chapter 18, and chapter 18 was its introduction to manufacturing accounting. And I told you that manufacturing accounting is in the building trade, whether it's building a highway or building a dorm or whether it's building a house. You need to know a little bit about manufacturing or cost managerial accounting. We have 2 courses here where you'll learn more about manufacturing accounting. One's managerial. I think about every student, every program has to take managerial, marketing, management, what have you. Accounting majors has to take cost accounting. They have to take both. They have to take ones that way to it. It's not required. So you will get into this subject deeper. But Jonathan, do you remember the 3 ingredients that go into making a product? Materials, labor, and overhead. Materials, labor, and overhead. Direct materials, direct labor, and overhead. Monique, do you remember some things that went into overhead? The indirect materials do and the indirect labor do. Do you remember some other items that goes into manufacturing overhead? Somebody help her out. Cole, do you remember?
No.
Anybody did. Electricity, property tax, depreciation on the factory. Anything on the factory, it's not direct labor, direct materials, is factory overhead. Supervisor's salary, foreman's salary, inspector's salary, mechanics, repairmen, janitor, nurses, whatever's in a factory. All right, it's factory overhead. The utilities and taxes and depreciation are common ones. So that was what chapter 18 was introducing you to. That also mentioned period cost and product cost. Does anybody remember the difference between period cost and product cost? We looked at an exercise where we had to separate those. All right, product costs are the 3 that Jonathan mentioned: materials, labor, overhead. Period cost is everything else. That's administrative and marketing. You have advertising expense, that's a period cost. You have the president at home office salary, that's a period cost. You have a warehouse, that's probably a period cost, and selling. So selling and administrative are period costs. So that's another thing that chapter 18 was trying to get across too. Okay. Now, chapter 19 and 20, we're not doing 20. 20 is process cost accounting. And everything you have in here is made through a process. It just goes to a department. All right? But the chapter we're covering is job order. And you don't have as much job order. Now, if you were wanting a house built, that job is a special for you, that's job order. If you wanted a tailor-made wedding dress, that'd be job order, it's just for you. Or if you wanted a business card, that's job order, it's just for you. Or if you wanted a yacht built for you, that's job order. Or if you wanted a 707 airplane made just for you, that's job order. Or if it's made just for an airline, it's job order. Now, the car industry is process. All these cars go through a process. But sometimes there are special orders for cars. If it's a police car, it may be special made. If it's a special ed car, the factory might put in an extra brake. Or if you order something for a handicapped person, that might be a special order, okay? So that's where we are, chapter 19. This is just a copy of the third test. And let me swap the slides. This next one. Study for 11, I'm going to give a little makeup test on exam day, chapter 16, 17, 18. You haven't taken the test yet, so it's cool. Study this, because the test was supposed to change. But on exam day, we'll have another test on the so you didn't take this, but study this chapter 16, 17, 15, 30. On exam day, so it was on Friday, you want to study?
Yes.
Go bluegrass. Next door is the Tennessee Walker State.
What day is that final on Tuesday?
Thursday. Supposed to be at 8 o'clock, but we're gonna start at 8:30.
Okay.
Okay. Mainly that's for me. I got an hour drive. So,
So, hour every day.
yeah, an hour here, an hour back. Yeah. But, anyway, I've been doing a lot of driving lately, Friday, come back Sunday from Cleveland, Tennessee, and yesterday I didn't keep my office hours. I had to drive to Knoxville, Tennessee. I had a daughter that had breast surgery, and stayed with her and took my grandkids to school and all that yesterday. Got home last night, and here's today. But anyhow, the one, a whole lot. Truck's not bad coming up here. Sometimes it gets 23 miles a gallon, something like that. It's not too bad. My car that I drove to Knoxville, it gets about 30. So, not too bad. I just bought a small motor home though, and it gets about 8 or 10 miles a gallon. And I want to drive it all the way out west this summer, so that's going to be a lot of gas. Okay, so Chapter 19 is where we are. All right, since more of you are here today, and since more of you are here and you have a book, this chapter, I want to look at page 28, 928. All of you have a book, or I think you can see a book. Okay. Do you have a book, Maya?
No, I'm waiting for Loris to get it. He did pick it up.
Oh, now who got your book? Where did your book end up?
Loris, the one was sitting behind me, he had picked
That's
it
what
up.
I thought.
Yeah.
Okay. I remember it sitting there. I can remember. I forget what was sitting there, but you were up here. Okay. He does have it. Good. Well, hopefully he's used it, and if he has, charge him some rent. Anyway, could you and maybe, oh, okay, there we go. Thanks, fella. Okay, if we could look at page 928. Now, we practiced some journal entries a little bit Tuesday. All right, at the bottom of page 928, if you buy materials, you debit materials and your credit accounts payable. Simple, okay. Now, when we put those materials in the work in process, page 929, you debit work in process and you credit materials. All right, now if we put indirect materials at that same time, you would have debit factory overhead for the indirect material and still credit materials for the total amount. Okay, on page 30, 930. All right, we got labor and we got time cards. We talked a little bit about time cards. Does anybody in here where you work, do you ever get paid in cash? Everybody gets a paycheck. Some places used to give the payday in cash. They would deduct your taxes and give you the net pay. All right, we had a chapter on payroll and we discussed time and a half and all that, so we won't discuss all that again. And Tuesday, I learned that a couple, three of you did know military time. Anyhow, on page 930, bottom of the page. So we've got labor that goes into work in process, debit work in process, and credit wages payable. Now, if any of that had been indirect labor, we would have debit factory overhead for 1,000, and we would credit wages payable then for 12,000. Okay, so there's the first two items going into work in process, materials and labor. All right, do you remember, and this was in chapter 18, do you remember out of materials, labor, and overhead, which two of those are prime cost? We mentioned prime cost. That would be materials and labor was prime cost. Now, labor and overhead was called conversion cost. So labor has something in common with both. So we did look at prime cost and conversion cost, and that could very well be in a multiple choice question. All right, now to factory overhead on page 932. You debit factory overhead for $4,500, you credit materials, you credit wages payable for indirect labor, and you credit utilities payable. Now, materials was for indirect materials. All right, now, if we were keeping track of factory overhead, we would post factory overhead $4,600. Now, if we knew, if we waited to the end of the accounting period we could just debit work in process and credit factory overhead for 4,600. This has to be closed out. All right, but you've got to give a bid based on estimated factory overhead because you don't know what it's going to be yet. Like a builder, his factory overhead may be, he can count nails as direct materials. Some may count it as indirect materials. But his factory overhead is depreciation on his equipment, the electricity used as factory overhead in building a house. Or if something accidental happened. When I had my house built, they were carrying a bath unit upstairs. They dropped it and knocked a hole in it. Well, they had to replace it. So whatever that cost was factory overhead because they damaged it and had to soak up the cost. All right, but we probably don't wait till we know the factory overhead. We have to have a predetermined amount. So that's where the next page comes in handy. You take your estimated or your budgeted factory overhead and you divide it by some denominator, and it could be direct labor hours. It could be machine hours, and it could be direct labor costs. That's your three most common denominators here, okay? So if estimated factory overhead were 100,000 and direct labor hours is 50,000, then your factory overhead would be $2 applied for every direct labor hour, okay? And same thing if you divide machine hours. But here, if you divide direct labor cost and budget factory overhead, let's say 100,000, and direct labor cost was 50,000. No, let's say 200,000. When you divide dollars into dollars, you get a percent. That would be 50%. So your overhead would be 50% of what your direct labor is. So now looking at page 933, at the bottom of the page, when you decide and you get this factory overhead rate, applying factory overhead to work in process, we've got direct labor hours, 850, and the factory overhead rate is $5. They calculate that above. They calculated direct labor hours into factory overhead. Predetermined factory overhead rate. All right, and they've got estimated total factory overhead or budgeted. So anyway, we got $4,250. We debit work in process and we credit factory overhead $4,250. Now going back to this amount, we debit work in process and we credit factory overhead $4,250. All right, now what is the difference here? What's the difference? How much would it take to make that balance? How much? All right, 350 would make it balance. All right, let's see how we do that. All right, and the next couple of pages tries to explain some of that, but the best way to look at it, well, now was it 350? Did they have another amount somewhere? Let's see. We have 4,250. I don't see any other debit or credit to factory overhead. But now they had a $200 balance. That's where I'm off. Okay. So for some reason they had a $200 balance. That's usually not normal. And then they put 4,250. Now, what will it take for that to balance? This is not normal, having a balance in factory overhead. You close it out. But anyway, what will it take to make this balance now? 44, 50, and 46? 150? All right, so look at that entry. Look at that entry on page 936. You debit cost of goods sold and your credit factory overhead, 150. When you debit cost of goods sold, that makes your item go up, okay? Now, if there's a big significant amount, you could take it out of 3, but we won't get into that. Okay, so now we've got materials, labor, and overhead. All right, we started like this. We started with materials, labor, and overhead, and those went to work in process. And that's where we are in the flow chart of factory journal entries. Here we debit materials and credit accounts payable. Then we debit work in process and credit materials. Here we debit work in process and we credit wages payable. And here we debit work in process and credit factory overhead for the applied rate. Now, where do they go from here? Where do they go from work in process? We got them all done. Where do they go to? I didn't say the word. We've got them all finished. All right, they go to finished goods. Okay, now how many inventories do you see up here? If you buy materials, you see an inventory. If you got work still being worked on in the factory, not finished, you see an inventory. And if you got goods ready to sell, you see an inventory. So a factory has 3 inventories, whereas a retail business had 1 merchandise inventory. So how many inventories does a service business have? None. None. A retail business has 1. A factory has 3. All right. You've got finished goods in the warehouse. What do you do with them, Carson? You sell them. That's why you made them. So we've got sales down here somewhere. And we've got cost of goods sold. But when you sell something, you'd probably debit accounts receivable, credit sales. Well, we would debit cost of goods sold and credit finished goods inventory. And that's all the entries you need to know in cost accounting, managerial accounting, and this chapter. Okay? They will go with you to the next 2 courses. Now, those are illustrated on page 938. $937, you debit finished goods, credit work in process. $938, you sell. All right, now period cost we mentioned was selling administrative. You got another flow chart on page 939. And that's the chapter. All right, we've looked at it twice in PowerPoint and in flipping pages. And what was your problems for today, Co?
It was exercise 9 and problem 2.
Exercise 9 and what?
Problem 2.
All right, now what I tried to get across in these exercises, since we practiced journal entries, those who were not here the other day, please practice problem 1. It has the journal entries in it. Now, exercise 9, also we have a predetermined factory overhead rate, which we've been practicing. So let's look at 9. Street Runner Engine Shop uses a job order cost system to determine the cost of performing engine repair work. So we can use job order when you take your car to the garage. Do they do the same repair on your car that they do on 100 others? No. You're individual. Your car's got a different problem. Cole and Jonathan's car don't get the same problem at the same time. So it's job. If Jonathan takes his car, it's just for Jonathan. All right, so that's what this automobile company is doing, repair shop. The average shop direct labor rate is $20 an hour. Determine predetermined overhead rate based on direct labor hours. All right. Now here you have engine parts. That's materials. And you have direct labor, 500,000. Shop and repair equipment depreciation is overhead. Shop supervisor salary is overhead. Shop property taxes is overhead. Shop supplies is overhead. Advertising is a period cost. Administrative salaries is a period cost. And administrative depreciation is a period cost. Determine a predetermined overhead rate per direct labor hour. All right. See if I can bring this problem up. What do you have to do to get the predetermined overhead rate in this problem? Usually they just give you budget factor overhead. Here they did not. All right, you've got to add up your overhead, which is shop and repair, depreciation, equipment, supervisor salary, taxes. So here's your total shop overhead, 205. All right. Now the engine parts and shop labor are direct to the jobs are not included. The advertising administrative expense are period cost. The estimated activity based in terms of providing the shop direct labor cost. All right, and this is working backwards, the direct labor, and you were charging $20, paying $20 an hour. So you worked 2,500 hours. So if you divide 2,500 hours into 205, you get your factory overhead at being $820 per direct labor hour. Now, how many direct labor hours did we have? How many did we have? Now, multiply that 2,500 hours times $8.20. Multiply 2,500 hours times $8.20. What does that give us?
20,500.
No, wait a minute now. If you multiply 25,000 times 820, multiply 820 times 25,000. I'm sorry, I might have said 2,500.
5,000.
All right, 205 even. Now that's what you would debit work in process for and credit factory overhead. Now, if I was drawing a T account, I would put 205 over here, credit to factory overhead. Now my actual factory overhead was also 205. If that be the case, we hit it right on and there's no under over applied. There's no balance to close out the cost of goods sold. So be able to determine a factory overhead rate in a multiple choice question. All right. So look at 1910. Take a minute and see if you can do B part on 1910. You've got to read it first. And I don't see the numbers there I'd like for you to see to work with. So let's go ahead and look at number 10. Now, first off, we may have had to do number or letter A, which I didn't ask you to do. The hospital I was at yesterday with my daughter, though, I was impressed. They probably had 50 or more outpatient surgeries that day as a cancer center. And they'd have the doctors listed on TV screen, their patients underneath the doctor. And it took you each step of the way. If you were in the waiting room, it would take you each step of the way that they were in a holding room or they had been put to sleep or the operation was beginning or the operation was finished. Or they were in the recovery room and they were in a room where you could visit. So they led you through every step so you could see where they were. And also, my son-in-law, they gave him a beeper that when the doctor was finished, going to talk to him, they had a conference room, and they beeped him up, you go and talk to the doctor. So I was really impressed with that hospital. All right, so A part we had to do first. We had to take the hours per day, which was 8 hours. They didn't tell you it's probably what you'd expect. Days per week, 7. All right. So 7/8 is what happened here. Weeks per year. Okay. I guess they're closing down 2 weeks. But 7/8 is what? 56. Now time 50. That all right. They should have done this and gave you the 56. So you'd have to have the 28. So estimated overhead, they've got the 812 added up for you, divided by 2,800 hours. your overhead is $2.90 per hour. $2.90 per hour. All right. But they worked a little backwards on that one too. Okay, the next thing we needed to do was a manufacturing statement. Okay, and I'm glad to see so many of you here today. One guy the other day, I think he had about a 50 on test, maybe a 69. Considering if we dropped the third test, and he wanted to know what kind of grade he could make an exam to get an A, about 250 probably. But you can add those points easy. If I'm taking only 3 grades out of your 4, if you want to B, that'd be 3 times 80 or 240 points on 3 tests. Okay. Now also on that day of the exam, I'll make sure you write down your points for pre-registration on your Scantron. And I'll make sure you write down points for attendance. That's not very many people that have attended. But anyway, any extra points we get for homework or anything, we'll write it down that day. Make sure I have it and have it on the Scantron. Okay, and what problem code was? What? 2A. All right, you will not have a manufacturing statement. On the test, but you'll have questions from it. All right, it says journalize these entries, so you've got another shot at journal entries. And I was more interested in instruction 3 and 4 and a manufacturing statement. Now, we practiced one the other day. A manufacturing statement has materials, labor, and overhead on it. And we'll practice one before the day is over. All right, 2A. I don't know what problem had some kind of graph in it, but I don't expect you to graph anything. Seems like we may have might have done that one yesterday, I'm not sure. All right, we did 1A on Tuesday, and that's just running again through buying materials. Now here, the example in your book, they did the indirect materials separate, but here's the way it's usually done. Direct materials 200, indirect materials 17.6, and materials 217. All right, a company would keep a record of what was indirect materials, what was direct. Same thing with labor. Your indirect labor was debit to factory overhead. Then you had some factory overhead, selling administrative expense, accounts payable. You had more factory overhead, selling administrative expense, prepaid items, whether you had prepaid insurance or supplies or rent, what have you. And you can see depreciation. You debit factory overhead and you credit accumulated depreciation in a factory. You don't debit utility expense. You don't debit depreciation expense. You don't debit rent expense. You don't debit tax expense. The only thing you debit is factory overhead, okay, in a factory. But now, if you've got administrative expense, you know you debit those and debit selling and credit prepaid or accounts payable or cash. All right, so here's where we apply the rate and put overhead in the work in process. Here's the finished goods, and here you sell it. and they didn't give you the other part of that entry, debit, accounts receivable, credit savings. When you sell something that costs 2 entries, J should have been 2 entries, but you didn't know the selling price. All right, now when we get to 2A, we're going to do some of the same things. So look out for journal entries on the exam, but in a multiple choice question. Okay, number 1, materials purchased. Number B, materials requisition and factory labor used. All right, there's materials used, and there's factory labor. Now, out of that materials, you put some in the job 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now, how much of that materials is factory overhead? Look under letter B. How much of the materials is factory overhead? All right, how much of your materials is for factory use? Says it right there. What is it, Jonathan? 1,080. So that's indirect materials. And Cole, how much is indirect labor? All right. If it's for factory use, it doesn't apply to a job, it's indirect. Go to all jobs, it can't be traced. So work in process, I do not like a compound entry like this. I would rather they have the work in process, factory overhead for the indirect materials, and then credit materials. Then made another entry, debit work in process, debit factory overhead, and then credit wages payable. So you had to add those two together. So I don't like that kind of compound entry, but it's okay. You get the same results when you post. All right, C then, factory overhead cost incurred, 5,500. So Monique, what do you think you would debit and credit there?
Debit, factory, credit, progress.
All right, work in process or progress. Now, you debit factory overhead and you credit accounts payable. And we won't debit work in process until we apply a rate. Okay, D part, depreciation of machinery and equipment. All right, Sydney, now we got depreciation. In a factory, what do you debit for depreciation?
Factory overhead,
Right, and credit?
accumulated depreciation.
Right. So you do not debit depreciation expense. The factory overhead rate is $54 per machine hour. Now you use 228 machine hours. Now multiply that by $54. And this is where you debit work in process and credit factory overhead for $12,312. So now we have materials and labor. And these did not go into work in process. But right here, finally, we have factory overhead. Those are the 3 things that it takes to make a product. All right, Anthony, we ship it to finished goods. What do you think we'd debit?
Yep. Debit finished good.
Right. And it's going from, what would you credit? It's going from work in process. So if you know where it's going to and from, you can get your debits and credits pretty easy. You know, I've got one student in this class that's live streaming, and they can't be in class. And I've got 3 or 4 other students. They come to class maybe once a month. I'm gonna tell you, next week, I'll have at least one student from this class coming to me and ask what kind of extra work can they do to pull their grade up. It's too late. Next week is too late. The only thing you can do next week is your exam and to make up tests. And if you did well on those two alone, you could pass this course. Because that's 2 out of 3. 2/3 of your grade could happen next week. Okay? All right, so if and jobs were shipped and customers were billed. So here we do sell to customers, and we know what jobs were shipped 1, 2, 3, and 4. We'd have to know how much materials, labor, and overhead went in each job, and we'd have to total up those jobs. And that's what we bill customers for. It might not be this one customer, it could be 10 customers, and we'd have to keep them separated. And we credit sales, and we have to add these up, cost of goods sold and finished goods. All right. We sold them for what? 34. Wait, something's missing here. Let's see. Here's the jobs we sold. 7085, 9314, and 5895. We didn't sell this job. So that's where your 22,000 comes from, is your cost of those 3 jobs. Now the 34,450, they had to tell you probably. All right, we bill one customer for 82.50, and another customer for 11.2, and another customer for 15. You have to add those up to get your sales or your accounts receivable. All right, that is another problem on journal entries. Problem 1 and 2 both are good for cost of goods sold and for your journal entries. Now, it asked you what these inventories are. Now, work in process, we have materials, labor, and overhead. And we shipped out, we sold 2 jobs or 3 jobs. That leaves us a balance of 27. Finished goods, we put 34,804. We didn't sell them all. All right, the cost of the goods we sold. So here's our balance of finished goods. Schedule of unfinished jobs, we got 4 and 5. We got materials, labor, and overhead. Now, these unfinished jobs has to match what you have in work in process. Okay? Unfinished jobs and work in process are the same thing. All right, now this is an inventory, and this is an inventory, and your materials is an inventory. Now we have this finished job sitting around in the warehouse ready to be sold, but it's not sold yet. Okay, so this chapter was journal entries and a predetermined overhead rate and a manufacturing statement. We did an exercise the other day that had a manufacturing statement on it. What exercise did we do that had a manufacturing statement on it? I know that was not might have been in chapter 18. Well, let's go over and look at exercise 15, or 13, I'm sorry, 13. All right, there'll be no assignments between now and next week. The only assignment is, now, if you bring this test in, this old test, answer it again. I'll give you a bonus for bringing this old test in with all answers on it. Now, that's gonna help you pass that test. So don't count these answers you have. They may not be good, okay? So bring this test in with answers on it to be your bonus. And, only homework. Now, that will help you with that test 3. You see. And on that test 3, you can still bring in, on a page of notes, but you can bring in those ratios. Okay.
So are we still gonna get extra credit for?
Yeah. Now, 18.5A, when did I sign it? The other day? If you have it, I'll take it today. That was a bonus. Did I say I'll
You
take
said
it?
bring it on the exam day.
All right, bring it on the exam day, and that'd be a bonus, plus this old test. Bonus. Okay. Well, we'll get those bonuses that day, your attendance, your pre-registrations, and, okay.
Well, our extra credit from our attendance in class for the last test and the extra questions we did that we turned in, are those still gonna count towards it?
It don't matter where I put them, it adds on to a test grade.
Okay.
Yeah, it don't matter where I put it. But you will get it. All right, when you weren't here and you were live streaming, you were supposed to text me. Now Taylor is about the only one that texts me every day, and I'm watching you live. Taylor's not here today. And only 1 or 2 people in here, you're here today or you're not here today, only 1 or 2 sends me a 1-page summary like you're supposed to. Okay. All right, but it's the end of the semester and no need for me to complain, and I'm not in the mood to give you a sermon. It's too late. All right. Okay, on this one, let's look at exercise on page 953. One of my students the other day said they were going to be baptized on Sunday, this past Sunday. And I told them it's about time they got fire insurance. All right. Anyhow, purchased 320,000 of materials. If we were doing a journal entry for that, we're supposed to do an income statement. We're going to do journal entry. We purchased 320,000 of materials. Okay, Monique, start with you. What do we debit? And credit? All right. How about payable? Yeah. Okay, Sydney, use 275 of direct materials. What would you debit?
Where are we at exactly?
All right, let's go to page 953, exercise 1913, and we're in Mayhood Hall, room 208. No, being serious, page 953, exercise 13. We're on the second little dot there.
Okay.
All right, we use 275 of direct materials. What entry would we have made?
Would you debit materials?
All right, now Monique In the first one, debit materials when we bought them. We don't want to debit them twice.
Okay.
We're not buying materials. We send them out to the factory to be used. And when we send them to the factory, then folks,
Would be work in progress.
right, when we send them to the factory, it's work in process and credit. We incurred 236,000 of direct labor wages. Okay, Anthony, how about that one?
So we acquired,
All right, 236,000 direct labor. What journal entry would you make?
you work in progress.
Work in process and credit, wages payable. That takes care of your first three most important journal entries. All right, now we applied factory overhead at a rate of 75% of direct labor cost. Now, 75% of 236,000, regardless of what the amount is, for that fourth black dot, Jonathan, what would you debit? When you apply factory overhead, what would you debit? No, you'd credit factory overhead and debit what? No, work in process. All right, what did you debit for when we put materials in the factory, Sydney?
We debited work in progress.
All right, what did you debit, Anthony, when you put labor into the factory?
Work in process.
And what do you debit when you apply factory overhead, Jonathan? Work in process. Now we got all three of them in the factory. All right, now we're going to transfer 652,000 co to finished goods. What do we debit? Now there's a big hint there. We're transferring to finished goods. So we debit finished goods and credit what? Right. Okay, Maya, we're going to sell goods. They cost 650,000. Yeah, 630,000. But what do we debit when we sell those? Right, and credit? No, finished goods. Yeah. All right. We put materials, labor, and overhead in the working process. We built the item. It's ready. We sent it to finished goods. Now we're selling it. And we're taking it out of finished goods. So, of course, in that next entry should be pretty easy. We sold them and we debit what when we sell?
Goods sold. Goods sold.
All right. No, you're going to sell the goods for $1 million something. You'll debit accounts receivable and credit sale. Now, the entry Maya had and you had, they usually go together. It's usually one instruction. Okay, so Clayton, now we got some selling expense. What would we debit for selling expense? It gives you the key word there. What do we debit? No, we're out of the factory now. This is period cost. And we debit what it says, selling expense. And we credit accounts payable. All right, we got 100,000 administrative expense. We debit administrative expense and credit accounts payable. Okay, now that was running through journal entries they did not ask us for. It says prepare an income statement, and we don't have time for it, or determine the inventory balances. So we're going to call it a day. I hope you really study it, put some time in on it. And Anthony, come up here and we'll look at your test. I can greatly hear about the fast that's running downstairs if I've got a key here. Here we go. and get that to show up over there. Yeah, Charlie.
19 June.
Right, 850. Looks like you got a 42 on it, times 2.
So I said 80. So do I still get my file for the homework? 16A and 16B, did we turn in that day? That was the first one to turn in.
Yeah, I'll give you that. Yeah.
Okay, so that's 84. That's 89. If you
Yeah.
Okay.
I can actually test for Taylor. He's sick. I can just give it to him practice.
For who?
Taylor.
Yeah. Yeah, and, what's that name?
Thank you.
Is there any way I could take, like one of the finals or one, like the make a test before Thursday? The reason because I had to start a new job Thursday and I have to be there at 9:30, which I was planning on being here early for the last final anyways.
Oh, let's see, there, my schedule is right here, okay. Now, the exam is on when, Thursday?
Mm-hmm.
All right, can you come up on Tuesday? On Tuesday, I have an exam at 10 o'clock. Now, Tuesday, I'll be here about all day. Can you be here Tuesday?
Mm-hmm. What time will be here Tuesday?
I'm giving an exam at 10, so
I can be
10
here.
o'clock will be
Okay,
fine.
yeah.
Take half of it, that's a good idea.
Okay, I can take the makeup on Tuesday and I'll just take the final on Thursday.
Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
that'll work better.
Okay, thank you.